Dear students, it's really amazing to see so much students here today. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to express my deep gratitude to Professor Trevor Hastie for being here today. He has just arrived from Amsterdam, where he has been nominated foreign member of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences in recognition of his scientific and scholarly achievements. Thank you for being here. His career is indeed extremely interesting, as he has always devoted his research to applied statistics or data science, as we would probably call it today. That is at the crossroad of many different disciplines. His joint appointment in Stanford as professor of statistics on one side and as professor of biomedical data science on the other side testifies the interdisciplinary nature of his work. This is also confirmed by the presence here of many colleagues from diverse fields ranging from mathematics to physics, computer science, artificial intelligence, business, genomics, and of data scientists working in many important companies of our region. He has contributed to the development of most of the methods that represent the compulsory toolkit for any data scientist, and which are the most widely used instruments for extracting knowledge from genetic data or for building statistical models suitable for the most diverse scientific areas. He has also pioneered with concrete actions the challenge of open science. His well-known books are made publicly available for free on his web page after 6 months from their publication. As you know, our university is strongly committed to open science as well as to promoting collaboration among different departments and researchers. We do it through the inter- and transdisciplinary cooperation in European projects, by financing interdisciplinary research programs, by proposing bachelor's, master, and PhD programs that aim to develop integrated knowledge through distinct disciplines, as well as by creating new interdepartmental research centers. We believe this is the only way to bear on complex challenges or large-scale transformations that cannot be fully grasped within single disciplines, like, for instance, climate change or artificial intelligence. I believe that not only I believe that the contribution of the research of Professor Hastie on these contemporary challenges is fundamental. And this is the reason why we decided to honor him with our Sigillum. His presence here is in turn an honor for the whole academic community, and I would like to thank all the members of the Department of Statistical Sciences for suggesting him as a recipient of our Sigillum. It is not the first time Professor Hastie is here in Bologna. He told me the third one. But with this award, we definitely welcome him as a member, as a full member of our community. This ceremony opens our fall season, which is very rich of events and meetings, though not always in the form of a ceremony as today's one. They are all characterized by a deep cultural content, and all the academic community, particularly all the students, can enjoy them. Before inviting Trevor Hastie to introduce us to the challenges of big data, the new kind of data that characterize our century, I leave the floor to the head of the Department of Statistical Sciences, Professor Angela Montanari, who will present Professor Hastie and his valuable research. Thank you.
Dear Rector, authorities, students, guests, and colleagues, I am really pleased and honored to introduce Professor Trevor Hastie in this day in which he will be awarded the Sigillum of our university. It is indeed special and overwhelming to have Professor Hastie here as a new honored member of our community. It is not his first time in Bologna, but it is the first time for him in Bologna with his wife, Linda, and I'm really happy to welcome her too in this special occasion. Trevor was here for the first time in 2003 when I invited him to give a keynote speech in the conference of the Classification and Data Analysis Group of the Italian Statistical Society. I already knew him very well from his papers and books, but of course he didn't know me. Unexpectedly, I guess because of the Bologna magic, he kindly accepted and gave a memorable talk on supervised learning from microarray data, that is on the use of gene expression to predict cancer class or survival time, and to find genes or groups of genes that are correlated with these attributes. I have nice memories of those days, and I think we had a great time during his stay. Since then, we have kept meeting at conferences and workshops. He has hosted postdocs from the University of Bologna in Stanford, and he has been in Bologna again in 2015, when during the conference of the International Federation of Classification Societies, we have celebrated the 25th anniversary of his well-known book on generalized additive models. And it is from this book that I will start describing the important contribution that Trevor Hastie has given to the identification of statistics as the indispensable method for data understanding. In this big data era, someone might be tempted to argue that data speak for themselves. Trevor has shown that this is profoundly wrong. As David Hand uses to say, people do not want data, they want answers. Raw data, however big, need to be analyzed and interpreted in order to be turned into knowledge, in order to be able to provide answers. And to providing data-based answers, Trevor Hastie has dedicated his long and impressive career. Once I asked him what he would suggest to a PhD student starting his or her research work, and he said, find a nice empirical problem and try to solve it with rigor and creativity. His book on generalized additive models and the paper that prepared its publication in 1990 were profoundly rooted in the empirical research of the 80s, dominated by the ideas of nonlinearity and of smoothness. The solution he proposed was really simple, but extremely powerful. It combined mathematical aspects, software availability, and empirical meaningfulness. I would like to remark that Trevor and his lifelong co-author, Robert Ipshirani, published this book about 5 years after the end of their PhD, and that the book is still the only authoritative reference on the topic. I think it is a good model for current PhD students. Trevor usually defines himself an applied statistician. I do not want to enter here in the thorny debate on what data science really is, but I think I am not going to be proved wrong if I say that Trevor Hastie has been a data scientist ante litteram, continuously and fruitfully combining mathematics, statistics, and computer science with a focus on providing tools for understanding reality. The methods he has developed are largely applied in genetics, medicine, ecology, image analysis, social sciences. Maybe this broad view comes from his education and work experience. He was born in South Africa, where he also obtained his bachelor and his master's degree. Then he moved to Stanford, where he obtained a PhD in statistics and where he is now professor of statistics and professor of biomedical data science. Before entering academia, he was first employed at the South African Medical Research Council, and he was a statistician and data analyst at what was then the AT&T Bell Laboratories. In 1994, he returned to Stanford as professor of statistics and biostatistics. In 2013, he was awarded the John Overdeck Professor of Mathematical Sciences, and in 2018, he was elected to the US National Academy of Sciences. He has received so many awards that listing all of them would take most of his speaking time. I would just mention the most recent one. As the rector has already said, 2 days ago, he has been nominated foreign member of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences with the following motivation. Hastie was one of the first to grasp the potential of computers for data analysis. He played a key role in the application of modern computer-intensive statistical methods, and it is thanks to him that researchers are increasingly able to tackle ever more complex data issues. Trevor Hastie's many books and articles are compulsory reading for apprentice data scientists. His co-authored book, The Elements of Statistical Learning, is among the reference books for any course in data science all over the world. It has obtained almost 50,000 citations. By the way, Trevor was the inventor of the term statistical learning. As I said, Trevor's focus is on data and on the development of methods that allow transforming them into knowledge. In this age of big data, the number of features measured on a person can be large and might be even larger than the number of observations. This new, abundant data no longer calls for smoothness as in the 80s. The new paradigm for analysis is represented by sparsity, that is, by the presence of a simple structure, of a small number of non-zero parameters or weights. The sparsity assumption allows to extract useful and reproducible patterns from big data sets. To these aspects, Trevor has devoted his recent research that has culminated in his book on statistical learning with sparsity. I could go on for hours describing the impact of Trevor's research on modern science, but I think it is time I leave him the floor. However, before doing this, I would like to mention his most recent book, Computer-Age Statistical Inference, Algorithms, Evidence, and Data Science. He made a present to me yesterday, and he gave me a copy of this book with his signature, and the signature of his co-author, that is Bradley Efron, and I'm very proud of having this book in my library now. This book is very dense, and in this book, Trevor Hastie and Bradley Efron described what the role of statistics has been and what it is going to be in data science. And the focus is on inference, a peculiarity of statistical reasoning that will continue playing a fundamental role in this big data world. To quote from the book, algorithms are what statisticians do, while inference says why they do them. And inference is what statistics can bring to data science, as it is the only possible way to understand uncertainty and variation. While preparing this presentation, I have listened to many talks on YouTube. In one of them, Silvia Plevritis, who is the chair of the Department of Biomedical Data Science at Stanford, said, "Those who have worked with Trevor Hastie know how incredible he is. And I also could not find a better word for describing him. Besides his scientific achievements and brilliant reasoning, Trevor is an example of how good science is collaborative, is generous, is gentle. I kindly invite you to keep those adjectives in mind while you listen to Trevor's lecture on statistical learning with big data." I now give the floor to Professor Hastie, and I warmly thank him again for being here.
Brava Angela, bello.
Wow, that was very impressive. really humbling. Now you can see why I like coming back to Bologna so often. I have to say, this is the most impressive building I think I've ever given a lecture in. And it's a real honor to be here on this occasion. And it's also an honor for me to have my wife present on this occasion and in receiving this award. She has been a support, Linda is sitting in the front row. She has been a supporter of mine for 38 years of marriage. And Professor Francesco Ubertini, thank you very much for the nice words. Thank you very much for allowing for this award today. It is a great honor for me. This university is so famous, so old, and I don't think I'll be more proud of any award than the award that I'm getting today. So it's a real honor, and I appreciated your lovely words of introduction. Angela, your introduction was fantastic. You've been a great friend. It's been really nice getting to know you and your colleagues over the years. And this was a big surprise when you told me about you nominating me. And you have a great department, 70 people in your department. And that's more than 3 times the size of the Stanford Statistics Department. Of course, you've had many more years to grow it. So anyway, and I'm really glad that this lecture was able to coincide with the data science workshop that's going on in University of Bologna. And so welcome all the data science students here. I'm really pleased to have you here. And I'm also pleased to have everybody else here. And I can see there's people from various disciplines, and so this is really great, and I hope my English is clear enough for you. I managed to get in some Italian, you see in the bottom of the slide here, but that's going to be the end. So this is Sequoia Hall at Stanford University, which is my home department, and there's a picture of Stanford University. I made sure I picked a picture where you could see some arches, knowing where I was coming. It was established, Stanford, in 1885. It's a little later than 1088. It's not the oldest university in the United States. It's not even the oldest in California. But it does have arches. But we hardly need them because it doesn't rain much there. So the talk today is about supervised learning. So build-in models from data to predict an outcome using a collection of input features. And just some take-home messages. As you all know, in data science now, there's some powerful and exciting tools for making predictions from data. But they are not magic, and you should be skeptical. They require good data and proper internal validation. Human judgment and ingenuity are essential for their success. When you have so many tools, you have to use common sense to decide which tool is right for which task. And with big data, model fitting takes longer. This might test our patience for model evaluation and comparison. It's also difficult to look at big data, and it may be contaminated in parts. In the old days, we used to say, plot your data, have a look for outliers, and so on. When you have enormous amounts of data, this becomes much more difficult, right? And careful subsampling can help with both of these. So there's a lot of names being going around. So machine learning has been around for a long time, and it's described as constructing algorithms that can learn from data. Statistical learning, we think of as a branch of applied statistics that emerged in response to machine learning, but it emphasizes statistical models and assessment of uncertainty, the latter part which is often missing in machine learning. And data science is the extraction of knowledge from data using ideas from mathematics, statistics, machine learning, computer science, engineering. And they're all very similar with different emphases. And of course, we would argue that this has been the role of applied statistics for for a long time, ever since it existed. Of course, computing's become more powerful, our tools become more powerful, the data's become bigger, but it's all along been what we consider applied statistics. So, for statistician, 15 minutes of fame. So here's some quotes. In 2009, Hal Varian, who's the chief economist of Google, said, "I keep saying that the sexy job in the next 10 years will be statisticians." And he's absolutely right. If you're a data scientist now, anywhere in the world, especially in Silicon Valley, you can command the best jobs. In 2012, in the Harvard Business Review, data scientist, the sexiest job of the 21st century. So this is really a good time for applied statistics and statisticians. The sexiest man alive. Things are changing for statistics. This is Rob Tibshirani, for those who don't know, who was my colleague for many years and the co-author of one of our first books on generalized additive models. So the supervised learning paradigm, the idea is you have some training data, you have a learning algorithm for fitting, and then you make predictions on new inputs where you don't see the output, right? So it's a very simple paradigm. In traditional statistics, domain experts work for 10 years to learn good features, and they bring the statistician a small, clean data set. So this is how I started off in statistics in 1975 in South Africa at the Medical Research Council. Small data sets, small numbers of variables, carefully chosen, you build models to predict from those data. Today's approach, we start with a very large data set with many features and use machine learning algorithm to find the good ones. So that's a huge change, much more automatic, much more chance of making bad mistakes and doing silly things, okay? So internal model validation, this is something we emphasize in all our books and whenever we teach. So don't trust me or anyone who says they have a wonderful machine learning algorithm unless you see the results of careful internal validation. And so a simple way of doing that is you divide the data into two parts, A and B. You run your algorithm on part A and then test it on part B, right? If it works in part B, you have some confidence in it. It's simple, yes, but done properly in practice, rarely. It's very often to cheat when you're doing this, to go backwards and forwards between part A and part B, to mix parts of the procedure and do it incorrectly. But it's really important to be rigorous when you do validation. So this is a quote that's in our field. In God we trust, all others bring data. That's often attributed to Edwards Deming, who was a famous applied statistician. So big data vary in shape, and they called for different approaches. So these two cartoons illustrate it. So these days we talk about wide data. That's when we think of the rows, these are like matrices, and we think of the rows as observations and the columns as variables, right? So we may have thousands or millions of variables and hundreds of samples, okay? So special techniques are called for. So screening and false discovery rate. Screening means you look at one variable at a time. Lasso, which I'll talk a bit more about today, which does variable selection. Support vector machines, stepwise methods. We have too many variables, and we're prone to overfitting, and so you need to remove variables or regularize or both. And then another situation is tall data. We have maybe tens or hundreds of variables, but thousands or millions of samples. So this happens in many fields. For example, in physics, particle physics, astrophysics, you get millions of observations. There we have some powerful tools too. GLMs, random forest, boosting, and deep learning. So tools have adapted according to the nature of the problem. But then, of course, you also get the situation where you have tall and wide data. So you get these very huge data sets. You cannot store it all in memory. You cannot run your usual algorithms. And so then we have to resort to some tricks of the trade and exploit sparsity. Often big data sets are very sparse, and so you can store them using clever methods. Random predictions or hashing. You can sometimes, you don't need to look at all the variables. You can make random projections and capture the bulk of the information in the variables. Variable screening. If there's so many variables, there's bound to be lots of correlations amongst the variables. You don't need them all. You can subsample the rows, divide and recombine. Case control sampling. I'll get into that a little bit later. Often the response is binary, and one of the classes dominates by many orders of magnitude. You don't need to see them all. Map reduce, ADMM. So there's many techniques for dealing with this situation, but these are adaptations of our techniques that we learn when we first learn data science. And of course, if you really need to work with big data, you join Google, and because they've managed to harness a lot of these tools. So here's some examples of big data learning problems, especially adapted to an Italian audience. So click-through rate. So when you go searching on the web, you get shown ads. So where do those ads come from? Okay? Why do they decide to show these ads to you when you click in on the web? So based on the search term that you've just issued, knowledge of the user, they know about you already, a lot of information through your IP address, and the web page about to be served, contents of the web page, what is the probability that each of the 30 candidate ads in an ad campaign would be clicked if placed in the sponsored link locations? So that's a prediction problem that has to take place when you type in a search term. So they use logistic regression with billions of training observations. Each ad exchange does this, and then bids on the top candidates, and if they win, they serve the ad. And all this has to take place in 10 milliseconds. Because when you click on a web page, it all comes up instantly. So all this is going on in the background. Now, of course, you're not training the models in 10 milliseconds. They've been trained, but the prediction has to take place. There's, and there's big auctions going on to see who wins a competition. It's quite amazing. Another example adapted to my Italian audience. Recommender systems. Amazon online stores, online DVD, rentals, Kindle books. You search for something on Amazon, of something you want to buy, in this case, Chianti glasses, and then it'll come up based on people like you and people who've searched for things like you. Maybe you'd be interested in these other items as well. So that's the job of a recommender system. Okay? Based on my past experience and those of others like me, what else would I choose? Okay, so here's some more examples of big data learning problems. So adverse drug interactions. So, when a new drug comes out in America, and other countries too, but in America we have the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, which requires that you subject the drug to a clinical trial. Right? And so you get a random selection of patients, they take the drug, they compare it to control, and you see if the drug works, if it's got adverse side effects. Right? But the problem is drugs can have interactions with other drugs the patient may be taking for some other disease or other complication. Right? And you cannot do clinical trials to test for all these possible adverse interactions. Okay? But the US FDA requires that physicians send in adverse drug reports along with other patient information, including disease status and outcomes. So every time the doctor's patient has some bad interaction, they have to send in a note to the FDA. Okay? So this is a massive data set, and it's quite messy, as you can imagine, because doctors have bad handwriting. So using natural language processing, Stanford BMI researchers found drug interactions associated with good and bad outcomes. So you can mine this massive data set from the FDA, and you can learn about these interactions. Social networks is another example of big data problems. Based on who my friends are on Facebook or LinkedIn, make recommendations for who else I should invite, predict which ads to show me. It sounds ominous that, that they want to predict which ads to show you, but I think probably you should be happy, because otherwise you could get ads that you would never be interested in. Most people think they don't even see the ads. I'm sorry to tell you that's not true. Even if you don't think you see them, you're seeing them. There are more than 2 billion Facebook members and 2 orders of magnitude more connections. So knowledge about friends informs our knowledge about you. Graph modeling is a hot area of research, and there's labs all over the world who do this, and some at Stanford. Okay. Here's a popular a recommender system. So Netflix. Do we have Netflix in Italy? Yeah. Netflix is everywhere. So you see movies on Netflix, you rent them, they're now streamed online, and it's probably a good idea to rate the movie when you've finished seeing it, because based on how you rate the movies, Netflix decides which movies to recommend and suggest to you. Okay? So Netflix made a competition which ran from 2006 to 2009. And I'll just flash a little bit ahead. This competition, they gave a data set. There was, the data set consisted of 480,000 Netflix customers and 18,000 movies. And for each customer on average in this data set had seen about 200 movies. So that's 200 out of 18,000 movies. And they were asked to rate the movies. And so you can see there's some ratings here. So this customer 1 rated Catch Me If You Can a 4. And that's the only rating we see in this little small snatch here. But so there's most of the entries are missing, right? Because the people didn't see the movies. So you have this big matrix, and the idea of a recommender system is to try and fill in the missing entries. And the way you're going to do that is you're going to try and find customers that overlap in the movies they saw, and also overlap in the ratings that they made, and then use them and the overlap to try and predict. And this problem is known as matrix completion today, and it's a great problem. We teach it in our class now. So the total number of ratings, there's 8 billion cells in this matrix, and there was 100 million actual ratings, so it's very sparse. Only 1% was observed. And Netflix offered a $1 million prize to the team that could improve upon their own recommender system by 10%. So this was a fantastic competition because it generated a lot of research, and a lot of new methods came out. There were 41,000 teams participated all over the world, and it actually lasted 3 years before a team could beat the Netflix recommender system by 10% in root mean square error, which was the target that they set. So this actually was a wonderful competition. And whoever set it up, actually I know who set it up, they did a really good job. Because if they'd made it too easy and the teams beat it in 5 days, that would have been a flop, right? So 3 years, that was fantastic. And the winning team was called Belcour's Pragmatic Chaos, which is a kind of chaotic name. It turned out the team was an ensemble of teams. In order to reach the goal, teams combined and combined their predictions, and that way they were able to leverage. And it was tied with another team called the Ensemble. And Belcour's Pragmatic Chaos was actually, there was a group of people from AT&T research labs in New Jersey, some of my old colleagues from my Bell Labs days. And on the Ensemble was Lester Mackey, who is a professor in our department, although he's left us for Microsoft in the last year. Okay, so that was a great big data modeling competition, and a lot of nice results came from there. So, strategies for modeling big data. So once the data have been cleaned and organized, we're often left with a massive matrix of observations, like the Netflix data. So if the data are sparse, lots of zeros or missing values, you can store the data, the matrix, using sparse matrix methods. And we use that more and more these days. What that means is you don't store the whole matrix. You just store the location of the non-zero or non-missing entries and the value. And so you can store it more efficiently. And there's methods for linear algebra that work with such data sparse matrices. So I'll show an example next. It's Quantcast is a company in San Francisco that does web advertising, and I consult for them. And as part of my consulting, I fit a sequence of logistic regression problems using our GlimNet package in R. So R is not particularly known for big data sets, handling big data sets. But because this data was sparse, I was able to do it. The data set had 54 million rows and 7 million predictors. So that's massive. But of course, it was extremely sparse, and it was mostly zeros. And I was able to store it in 256 gigabytes of memory. And it took 2 hours to fit a series of 100 models of increasing complexity. So for me, that was certainly the biggest model I'd ever fit in my life. And it definitely beat the beginning of my career, where the big data set was 300 observations and 10 variables. If not sparse, we use distributed and compressed databases. Many groups are developing fast algorithms for such. For example, there's another company in Silicon Valley, H2O, and if you don't know about them, look them up. They provide free software based on R, and also it's Java-based software, and they implement all the data science and machine learning algorithms. So if you have a really big learning problem, you can consider using H2O tools as well. So I mentioned GlimNet. This is a package that I'm very particularly fond of right now, and I spend a lot of my time working on it and developing it. And it was developed with me, that's me, the nerd, and Jerry Friedman, Rob Tibshirani, Noah Simon, Yunyang Kian, and Balasubramaniam Narasimhan. And these are all at Stanford University, although Noah Simon was a student, he's now at University of Washington. And what GlimNet does is fit generalized linear models with regularization. So we use lasso and elastic net penalties in fitting generalized linear models. So I'm showing you a logistic regression model now, which is a linear model, but we use, in this case, a lasso penalty, which introduces sparsity. So we put what we call an L1 bound on the coefficients. So when we fit the model, we fit it subject to the restriction that the sum of the absolute values of the coefficients is less than some bound S. And as you make S smaller, it pulls the coefficients towards 0, and in doing so, it sets many of them to 0, exactly equal to 0. So it does both selection and regularization. GlimNet is extremely fast, and it achieves its speed by using an old method for optimization called coordinate descent, which is you update one parameter at a time, holding all the others fixed, and you cycle around and around until it stabilizes. And it turns out, for models that have a lot of sparsity, this turns out to be really efficient. And then we also fit a path of solutions as you relax the regularization, and then you can use warm starts. And so it turns out to be really efficient. And it's got built in many options, including cross-validation. So yeah, I'll give some examples of using GlimNet on big problems. So I mentioned Quantcast. There's this data set that I mentioned consists of 5-minute internet sessions, right? And there were 54 million of those. The binary target is a type of family that was on the internet. So you've got a household with adults and children, and you want to know in this 5-minute session, or have some estimate whether it's a child on the internet or if it's an adult. And that will determine the suitability of any kind of advertising. You want to make sure you don't show inappropriate material with children on. So there were 7 million features of session information. So these are usually web page indicators and descriptors, and of course that will be extremely sparse because the web page, you're either on a web page or not. And so we had a 54 million training, validation 5 million, test 5 million. And so there are some details. And as I mentioned, it took 2 hours. And so for me, it was a great achievement just to be able to fit the model. But this was something that came out. We had information on the day of the week and the hour of the day. And this is showing what we're looking at is the probability of children being in the session. And what you see is that hour of the day, children, everyone goes to work or goes to school, so probability of children drops down, but then they come home from school. These are the 5 days of the week, and these are the 2 weekend days. So on the weekend, the parents either don't let them go on the computer, or they hog the computer, but when the children come home from school, they get to go on the computer. And with a large amount of data, you can believe in these curves, because they're pretty accurate. And this one over here is Friday, and a lot of adults come home early or from work on Friday, so the probability a child is on the computer starts dropping. So that was an interesting modeling exercise. Maybe more important here is modeling genome-wide association studies and data from genome-wide studies. So this is a particularly big data set, UK Biobank genomic data. There's 500,000 subjects, measurement people in the UK, and they've had their genome sequenced. And so we've got measurements on 800,000 SNPs. So these are loci along the genome, and the SNP measures a genotype and tells you whether there's a mutation in that location. 1 or 2 mutations, because we have a pair of chromosomes. Okay? So, but 800,000 and 500,000 subjects. So that's a massive data set. Okay? And we used a variation of our program, GLIMNet, to fit logistic regression models and regular regression models with lasso regularization. And what I'm showing you here is, let's look at the red curve. In this case, the phenotype. On these subjects, we got many phenotypes measured. So these are disease status and various aspects about their health and their bioinformation. In this case, I'm actually looking at stand-in height because it's an interesting phenotype because many of the chromosomes are involved. And what I'm showing you here is a lasso regularization path, right? So this is the steps along the lasso as we relax the regularization. And I'm showing you the R squared, so the percentage of variance explained, which in this context you can think of as heritability explained by this model. And you can see, and this is a validation data set, so it's not the training data set is this black curve here, but the validation data set is here. And this is what you expect. The model starts, it improves and improves, and then it starts leveling off. And if you go on further, it'll start to overfit, and the performance will decrease. And we only go as far because it's very costly. It's very costly. We only go as far as we need to because it gets more and more expensive the more variables. So at this point, we've got 47,000 SNPs in the model, and we've reached heritability of 70%. So that's pretty. That's a pretty good performance, and takes a while to fit. It took several hours to fit this model, but these tools are available, and we've got a package that's freely available called SNPnet, and anyone can use it. Here's another one, another phenotype, which is asthma. And so in this case, so height, I mean, that was just to show an example of what we could do. But for diseases, it's particularly interesting because now you can build what we call polygenic risk scores. So based on the genomic information on a subject, you can estimate their risk for various diseases. In this case, it's asthma. And what we see here, the green bars are the controls. They didn't have asthma. The orange bars are the asthma cases. And along the horizontal axis, we've ordered the subjects by their polygenic risk score. So we built a big lasso model for predicting the probability of asthma, and we've ordered the people according to that probability. And indeed, you see that the odds ratio, this is the odds ratio of asthma, increases monotonely with our polygenic risk score, and this is on a validation data set. Many chromosomes are involved. These are all the SNPs that were selected by the lasso model for this polygenic risk score. There's 23 chromosomes, and you see every chromosome has some presence in this model. And here's another representation of the result. Here we break the data up into various quantiles. So these are the people with the top, in the top 1% of the polygenic risk score, and we plot the time to asthma onset as a function of age. And sure enough, you see these curves are increasing with the polygenic risk categorization. Right? So this is clearly doing the right job on these data, and there's something like 2,000 phenotypes available for the UK Biobank, and we're busy fitting models like this to all the phenotypes. So this is an ongoing project, and this is a slide just mentioning the H2O again, for those who are interested. So some more strategies for modeling big data. So online or stochastic learning algorithms are popular. You need not keep all the data in memory. So deep learning methods today use stochastic gradient descent, and it's very efficient for fitting big models with lots of parameters, lots of data. Subsample if possible. So when you model the click-through rate, so remember I had with the ads being shown, you need to model the probability that a web user is going to click on an ad. So they call that the click-through rate. You have a training data set with many experiences or web pages being shown to people, and you've got recorded whether the person clicked on an ad or not. Right? And you've got the characteristics that I mentioned about the ad and the user and the search terms and so on. Now, of course, most people don't click on ads. The vast majority, I think about 0.01% of people click on ads. So if you build up a data set, you're going to have you're going to have one positive example per 10,000 negative examples. Right? So it's mostly negative examples. Now, if you're going to fit a logistic regression model, the question is, do you need to use all the negative examples? Well, no, because at some point, there's diminishing returns, right? There's a lack of information in the positive examples, so you can use some number more negative examples than positive examples, but you don't need 10,000, right? So maybe 15 to 1 is sufficient. And that's a form of subsampling that reduces the size of the problem dramatically. So years ago, Jerry Friedman and I consulted for Facebook before they were such a huge company as they are today. And sure enough, they were trying to fit these models using all the data and taking days and days to fit them. And just one little piece of information like this, and it saved them a lot of headaches. Unfortunately, they didn't give me any stock options. So Wolf Fithian was a student of mine, and there's a paper in the Annals of Statistics on adaptations of case control sampling and adaptive case control sampling for this kind of strategy. Think out of the box. So how much accuracy do you need? Again, we've got big data. You want to do some modeling, but how much accuracy do you need? So often timelines can play a role. And you want to be able to explore a number of different approaches. And so if each approach is going to take many hours to fit, it's tedious, and you're probably going to get impatient and stop too soon. So explorations can be done on subsets of the data. So here's a little project with my good colleague Brad Efron, which we tried out. Many people have done things like this. We called it spray gun. We had a data set. There's a data set of beer ratings from Germany. There's 1.4 million ratings, which was a numeric score, and there were 750,000 features, right? So the ratings were documents, right? So this is a problem of document prediction, right? Your features are documents, and so you have to represent the document. So usually the representation's sparse. Typically use a bag of words model. In this case, it was a bag of trigrams, so words, unigrams, bigrams, and trigrams. And so a big data set, very sparse. If you ran a lasso regression, it took 70 minutes to fit the path. So that's the model in red, the red curve. So I'm showing you relative mean squared error on a test data set. And this is the lasso path. And initially it does really poorly. As you include more and more variables, this is indexed by lambda, the regularization parameter, you start doing really well. You want to be small, and then you start overfitting, and it starts increasing. Okay? But that took 70 minutes. So instead, we divide the data set into 25 parts at random, and we fit lasso models on each of the parts. Right? So we fit separate lasso models. Well, there's their performance. There's 25 similar curves to this one, and you can see they have a similar kind of behavior. They do initially well, they reach a minimum, and then they start overfitting. They were all trained on 1/25 of the data of the big model, right? And so they don't do nearly as well. But then you do something really simple. You just average the 25 predictions from each of these models, and then you get the blue curve. So the averaging gets rid of variance, and the blue curve has, in this case, a really interesting behavior because it doesn't quite get down as low as the red curve, but it gets pretty close, but it doesn't increase as well. So the variance has kind of disappeared. This is all due to variance, right? But the interesting thing is, if you have distributed computing, and even without, you can fit all of these red curves in about 30 seconds, right? Because the data set's much smaller. And you can do you get free cross-validation and standard errors as well because you average in independent solutions. So it's if you're willing, you sacrifice a little bit of accuracy and you get much more for it, right? And you also don't spend the whole day watching the computer. Okay, how are we doing here? I'll give one more example. Predicting the pathogenicity of missense variants. So what is a missense variant? This is when your RNA gets turned into proteins. Each RNA molecule gets turned into amino acid. Now, if there was a mutation in your genome, it will be represented in the RNA, and it'll potentially create the wrong protein, right? And the wrong amino acid, and therefore potentially alter the function of the protein. Protein is a polymer which consists of many amino acids. So when they say missense variants, it means there's a mutation and it creates really the wrong amino acid. So in this case, we want to prioritize a list of candidate genes for prostate cancer. And this is work with my epidemiology colleagues at Stanford. So the approach here was we actually developed an ensemble method. And an ensemble method means you take a collection of methods that try and solve similar or the same task or similar tasks, and you use the output of those methods as input to your prediction model to maybe come up with an improved prediction method. So that's what we did. And so there were 12 methods that have been out there, and some of them are very successful, that have been proposed for this task. And so you want to predict which mutations are pathogenic, which means they have a bad impact on prostate cancer. And in this case, you just want the probability so that you can rank these as candidates for further investigation. So we had various data sets that we were able to use. And so you can see we have a training data set with 123,000 neutral, which means they weren't pathogenic, and 6,000 disease cases. And then we had a test data set, which was smaller. Usually don't need such a big test data set. So there were 12 different methods, and what we show you is a correlation matrix of these methods with each other. Right? So in these ensemble methods, if all the methods are doing pretty much the same job, you're not going to get much improvement by combining them. Right? So the hope for improvement is if they actually they differ and disagree in places. And this correlation matrix, it's color-coded, but you can see there's a fair bit of disagreement. So the method we used was based on decision trees. So many of you will know about decision trees. This is a method for making predictions. And when you have a bunch of features, what you do with a decision tree is you ask questions. Is this particular variable less than a certain, or in this case, bigger than 0.9? If yes, you go left. If not, you go right. And then you ask more questions of the data. And you basically subdivide in the data and carving yourself down into a little area in predictor space, and then your prediction is the average of what you see there. So this is a method that's been around for a very long time. It's called a decision tree. And it's particularly popular with epidemiologists and medical doctors. But the problem is shallow trees are too coarse or inaccurate. So even though they give nice, simple to read prediction rules, they're not very accurate. So random forests were introduced by Leo Breiman, who was a colleague, and he passed away in 2005, but he was a colleague of ours for many years. And he came up with this idea of random forest. And random forest, as many of you know, is one of the important tools in data science today. So he realized that for more accuracy, you needed deep trees. So this is not a deep tree, that's a shallow tree. You need a deep tree that makes many, many more splits. Right? But they're very noisy, so they've got very high variance. So his idea was you fit many such trees, thousands of them, and average their predictions to reduce the noise. And that's only going to work if you make the trees different. And so he used various forms of randomization to make the trees different. So you use bootstrap subsample the data. That will give you different trees, and they also randomly ignore variables as candidates for splits. So random forest, very accurate, very effective, easy to use, and they're automatic, and they give for free cross-validation estimates of prediction and so on. So in R, there's a package, random forest. There's versions in Python and so on. Very useful tool. If you never heard of it, you'll go away with one new important piece of knowledge today. And it turned out on our problem, it worked really well. So this is an ROC curve, which compares true positive rate to false positive rate on a test set. And basically, what you want to be is up in this northwest corner over here. And our method, which is called Ravel, is up in the northwest corner. Right? So remember, our method was combining 12 other methods. And we're doing the best. Of course, I wouldn't show you this picture if we weren't doing the best. And these other curves are actually other methods, other ensemble methods for combining these same 12 predictors. Right? And so they're all doing quite well. We've got some close competitors, but this did really well, and this was published. So random forest also gives you feature importance. And here we see that some of those 12 methods were much more important than others. So it's a very nice tool, random forest. Okay, I'm not going to tell you about these. These are some other methods that I would normally talk about, but I think it's probably a good time to end the talk. And so I won't tell you about it, but except I'll just say there are these two methods. We have a Glinternet, which is a package for fitting linear models with pairwise interactions and identifying the interactions using lasso type methods. And so that's a package, Glinternet in R, that was with a student, Michael Lim. And Gamsel is a method for doing automatic selection in generalized additive models. With generalized additive models, when we first put them out, you decided how much flexibility you had in each of the functions. This package, Gamsel, uses lasso methods and group lasso to do automatic selection of both whether variables are in the model or not and how smooth they are. But I won't get into the details, so now I'm going to do a fast skip ahead and get to the summary. So all the tools I described are implemented in R, which is wonderful free software that gets increasingly more powerful as it interfaces with other systems. The recent R user conference in Toulouse in July had more than 1,200 attendees. And I'll end with some cheap marketing. These are 4 of our recent books. And as was said already, the PDF of all these books is available for free download on our websites. So thank you very much for your attention. Again, a real honor.
I really wish to thank Trevor Hastie for his very interesting and inspiring lecture. Let me thank also all the students and colleagues that follow the ceremony in Rimini by streaming. And now we are going to listen Sonata per pianoforte numero 11 by Mozart that will be played by Matteo Farnè, who is a postdoc student of the Department of Statistical Sciences, and he spent a research period at Stanford. And I asked to Trevor if he was a good student. He said, excellent. So thank you all for being here with us. Thank you.
Grazie Matteo e grazie a tutti voi per essere stati con noi questa mattina e grazie soprattutto al professor Trevor Hastie e a sua moglie che ci hanno onorato nella loro presenza. Grazie a tutti.
I finish in Italian. Just at the end of the ceremony. I hope you enjoy.